Okay. So, so the title of the talk ultimately ends up really playing on color and texture in this room, and you'll see through the course of the slides that the room really rather revealed itself to us through physical investigation of objects and documentary research. So this is ochre, old fustic, and maple, reinstating color, texture, and a flying tester bedstead in Stenton's yellow lodging room. And sometimes it's not moving forward for me. Just going to stop the share for. There we go. So I'm delighted to share with you today a project which, when I first arrived at Stenton in 1999, was really something I couldn't have even fully dreamed of. But all the bed chambers on the second floor have hooks in the ceilings. And I knew this had something to do with the way that testers, or the frames for bed curtains, were suspended or partially suspended from the ceilings of these rooms, but really didn't know yet how it worked or what the bedsteads may have looked at. And so this is just something that, as I came to work at Stenton, really just continued to kind of gestate in my mind. But ultimately, this would lead to a full-on restoration of the yellow lodging room, including the recreation of the flying tester bedstead. So there are many images to show you today with details related to our recreation process and the many materials involved. So some of the images will fly by rather quickly because I'll let some of the images do the talking for me. Now, in the city of Philadelphia, Stenton was originally a 511-acre plantation, about 5 miles north of the center of the city of Philadelphia and just a little to the west toward the Germantown village. Completed in 1730, the house follows a form common to the Atlantic world's gentlemanly class of mercantile elites, the sort of small classical box. As you can see here, it's double pile in plan, so it's 2 rooms deep, and you can see there's a room toward the front and a room toward the back, and on this eastern side, there's a little kind of tiny entry side passage. So it's 2 rooms deep and 2 rooms wide, with a center hall and a staircase, sort of grand staircase framed by an arch. And the focus room for today is these 3 windows here across the front of the house where the yellow lodging room sits. Provincial Secretary James Logan moved his household to Stenton in 1730. The house served as the family's primary residence until his death in 1751, after which time it descended in the family to eldest sons until after a 40-year period of neglect, when it opened as a historic site administered by the National Society of the Colonial Dames in Pennsylvania, beginning in 1899. I'm just showing you here some slides of the Logan daughter's needlework. Sarah Logan's sampler, which she may well have wrought in Anne Marsh's school in Philadelphia. We know that Logan paid for both of his daughters to attend that school. And then later on, John Smith's pocketbook, thought to be made by Logan's daughter, Hannah. And these textiles in the 18th century are second to silver the most expensive things found on household estate inventories, and really just some of the most expensive things people owned. And in this sort of early part of the 18th century leading up to 1750, these kinds of furnishing textiles were almost exclusively imported, usually through England, if they even had more exotic origins. And as you'll see when we look at dyes and things like that, that these textiles, just right down to their threads and dyes, speak to the nature of global trade in this period. This is a page in James Logan's ledger at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, and I've just pointed out some of household furnishing entries just to give a sense of the kind of things one might find. This begins in 1720 and goes up to 1727. So this is the period actually when Stenton was being built. And some of these things undoubtedly wound up as part of Stenton's furnishings as well. So cotton to make curtains, feathers, the things that would go in the mattresses and the pillows. John Hausman, upholsterer, for making a bed and 2 stools. And I should clarify too that a bed is typically the word applied to what we think of as a mattress. The bedstead is the wooden frame that mattresses are placed on. Account of stock for the furniture, and bed furniture is the period term for textile hangings in the room. So the bed and its furniture are its full curtains. Curtain and stuff from Brother Pemberton, a cash for a suite of, or suit as they said, curtains and quilt, etc. And here for diaper, this is a diamond weave textile that's often used for particularly table linens and napkins. An account for a couch. So that just gives you kind of a sense. So I didn't mention the plush for a couch bed. So you get the sense that Logan is acquiring textiles, trading in textiles, and in fact, one of the things that he was known for in his ledger books, there's a lot of the trade that he did with Native Americans, not directly, but through kind of agents on the frontier, and Stroud cloth, which comes from the west of England in the Stroud River Valley, a coarse wool was very often traded with Native Americans, and is even known in some of the Conestoga town archaeological remains. But here we are coming up the grand staircase. We've turned the 2 landings and seeing Stenton's double wide stair as it comes up to the 2nd floor landing, where there are 2 double doors leading to these 2 large chambers across the front of the house. This one on the right that lines up with the stairs is the yellow lodging room, and you're looking into it as it was prior to our restoration project. And here kind of laid into the plan as well. And James Logan's inventory, I'm sorry I don't have a really nice clear picture of this. This was taken under glass, and I should try to get a better image for these slides. But we're so lucky at Stenton to have this documentation that tells us what the rooms were called, what was in them, how much objects were worth at the time of Logan's death. And you can see there was a yellow worsted damask bed with curtains, window curtains, and bedclothes, etc. So worsted damask is a wool woven in a kind of bold floral pattern. There were 12 maple chairs with worsted damask bottoms en suite. So this is an impressive room where the textiles are matching. And these have quite a high price, which may have something to do with the fact that these were maple chairs. And we're uncertain actually exactly what chairs they may be. They haven't come down with a family provenance to us. Old brass chimney furniture with shovel, tongs, and fender, maple chest of drawers and table, and we are so lucky to have Logan's actual maple chest and table in the room. These were a bequest of a Delaware dame, Mrs. Copeland, in 2001. 2 sconce glasses with brass arms, and 1 old tea table with a broken set of china, for a total in the room of 66 pounds, 2 shillings and 6 pence. But the bed was certainly impressive, and with the curtains at 30 pounds. So here's actually what the yellow lodging room was in 1975. And in fact, there had been quite a lot of research done in the 1960s. A Winterthur fellow named Ray Shepard, whom some of you maybe knew of, who's not too long deceased, and also worked in Western Pennsylvania at, why am I blanking on the harmonist site, but that may be ringing a bell for some people.
Old
And he was, what's that?
Old Economy.
Old Economy, yes, thank you. And he was the director of Cliveden in the 1970s, but he did his thesis on Stenton and located a number of Stenton things, and also prompted the dames to do some furnishing projects. And so in 1975, they installed a yellow lodging room by working with a local decorator in Chestnut Hill, George Lampus Interiors, and commissioned these kind of a ready-made available yellow wool, this kind of Baroque style hangings for the space, and furnished this federal period bedstead that was in the collection at Stenton. It was a gift from Lydia Thompson Morris, who lived at the Morris Arboretum and was an early Pennsylvania dame, and furnished the room, bringing it to this sense of the kind of what the first era of habitation may have looked like as they thought about it, and using collections available in 1975. Later on, it became clear after the 1980s and the Historic Structures Report research that the yellow lodging room was the one opposite the staircase, and that the blue lodging room, which had held James Logan's library, was the one more towards the east, on the other side of the front of the house. And this is how the room looked. I think these photos were maybe taken about 10 years prior to the restoration project. This was done for the magazine Antiques. And early on in my time at Stenton, I suggested to the collections committee that why don't we just play around with the space a little bit and move the bedstead under the hooks in the ceiling, just to see what it would look like. And this caused a little bit of an uproar, actually. There was kind of like, well, why would you put a bed in front of the window? And so I assured everyone this was a movable change, and we could just experiment a little bit. And so this was the beginnings of really starting to understand how the room felt to just even have the bed placed in front of the window there, which is still I think an interesting and curious arrangement. But just notice that these curtains hang floor to ceiling. Notice the valances. Notice the color. This is a 1980s paint restoration using ready-made paints from the paint store, but that were matching a study done as part of the Historic Structures Report. And at that time, the research suggested that the chair rails, the window seats, and the baseboards were dark brown on the window seats and the sills and chair rails, and then black actually for the baseboards around the room. So I continued to just always be interested whenever I saw hooks in the ceilings in historic houses. And all things considered, since I've been thinking about this for over 20 years, I haven't found that many in our region. But here are some examples. This is in Burlington County, New Jersey. And interestingly, a number of these are actually a bit later than Stenton. This is the second floor chamber over the study in Bartram's Garden that, like Stenton's yellow or white lodging room rather, has 4 hooks in the ceilings. Here's down in Cecil County, Maryland, in the Nottingham lots. And then there's a period room in the Baltimore Museum of Art that has a cornice actually built into the ceiling, so marking where the bed went by the cornice itself. And then this is in a different Westover, perhaps, than the one that first comes to mind, in Northampton County, Virginia. This was an attic space with a cornice in the ceiling. And here, one in Salisbury, Maryland, Pemberton Hall, which has sort of turned almost spindles that hung down and clearly had rods going through on which curtains could move. But what really got my mind going about what the Stenton yellow lodging room bedstead could have looked like was my visit to the Handel House in London when I was on the Addingham Summer School in 2007. And here it is as it was newly restored and published in 2005 in Country Life. And these actually, the hooks that happen to be in conjunction with this bedstead are not original, they're added, but ours are original. And this image is really for a aristocratic, great house chamber, but to give you a sense for the way these rooms functioned in the late 17th and early 18th century, this idea of the upholstered chamber, textile and color en suite, with a full set of here fully upholstered back stools, floor to ceiling bed curtains, and this even probably has kind of upholstery on the walls as well as these sort of little draperies kind of upholstered to the walls as well. So very magnificent room. But Stenton's room functioned, or was intended, at least intended to function in much the same way, that probably only important guests would have slept there, conceivably members of the Penn family or other colonial governors that came. Stenton was a kind of de facto governor's mansion in the 1730s while Logan was acting governor of Pennsylvania. So it's an entertaining space and a space that's meant to impress, and probably was used as a kind of like a withdrawing room after dinner, that women might go into the yellow lodging room and men might go into the blue lodging room with the library and the books as its focus. And the fact that there was an old broken set of tea wares, china, in the room also, along with the textiles, offers a kind of a feminine orientation in a sense to the use of the room. So also on my Addingham summer school trip, we went to a park, a National Trust property, with this dollhouse. And it doesn't show well in the overall image, but I do want you to see the yellow flying tester bed with red trim and this blue one here. And to my kind of great delight, there were even these miniature hooks in the ceiling holding up the testers for these beds, and started to really confirm in my mind kind of how this may have worked at Stenton, with that surviving bedstead at Handel House, owned by English Heritage, with new upholstery, and thinking about how we might be able to ultimately install something ourselves. And here's also a little detail of the yellow bed in the Up Ark baby house as well. And I did want to mention, for those of you who might be particularly interested in this topic, this is a new book, a relatively new book you can easily get your hands on, by Annabelle Westman, who studies great bedsteads and their furnishings and trimmings in the UK. It's called Fringe, Frog, and Tassel: The Art of the Trimmings Maker in Interior Decoration. So I just continued to find examples that I could build on in thinking about Stenton. And here's this antiquarian William Stukely's watercolor of his chamber in Grantham in England in 1729. And I did in fact go back to this and use this when planning the proportion for our bedstead, and how the cornice might be set into the room, and how tall it needed to be, and so forth. So these kinds of seemingly small bits of research would come into play. And I had known through Gail Keskey Winkler that this cornice survived in a historic house museum called Wallingford in Monmouth County, New Jersey. And she had her suspicions that she thought it was possibly the only kind of freestanding Baroque cornice with American origins that survived. And so we went to look at it and document it. It really seems to be quite a separate thing from what's below. And just so it's not too confusing, the room that we're visiting as looking at this bedstead was kind of, they had copied the idea of a black and white photograph of the room, which is why all these things got painted this gray color, which is a kind of curious way of interpreting. But at any rate, we carefully measured and documented this cornice and the way that it would fit together with hooks, so we could draw up a pattern and ultimately build one. So this is Mike Podmaninsky here, who built the new bedstead from poplar to our specifications, and this is Elizabeth Paolini, who is our seamstress, and we're just beginning. Mike has just started building the bed, and we're starting to see how it will come together in the Stenton yellow lodging room. These are the pieces, the rails, the back panels, and here the cornice on the floor itself. I should also mention at this time that we received a gift of a reproduction Logan settee from Anderson and Stauffer furniture makers in Lidditz. And so we have this in an unupholstered state as well. And our Logan family quilt that has a blue side and a yellow side, which I've always thought was maybe added evidence in effect that it was used at Stenton, that it could be used en suite or matching in the blue lodging room or the yellow lodging room, or as you'll see in our final installation, we had it on the blue side for quite a while, kind of contrasting to all these yellow hangings. But there was a lot of little pieces that went into this, and I think I saw maybe that Gina Whalen has logged on, and this is an engineer that she helped us connect with, who came in, and we did these weight tests with sandbags to be sure that our hooks were really going to be able to hold. We didn't want to put undue strain on the plaster or the structure of the house by recreating this bedstead. And now just turning to the textiles itself, there was, we know what a damask is, but where were we going to get it and how much did we need? And we also were very lucky in this painting of Lady Juliana Penn. So from just about the same time period as Logan's estate inventory, this is at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and the museum had already actually commissioned a drawer to create a cartoon for weaving from this painting. So essentially translated the image from the painting into a textile. And that was woven with context weavers in Lancashire, UK. And so we commissioned 177 yards of their, we call it the Lady Penn damask for Stenton. And it came initially in, you can see it in its undyed state, which is known as a gray goods. It's spelled Greige. It looks like grige, but pronounced gray goods. And so we continued to research what is the right yellow? What is the fact that this room is called yellow? What does that even really mean for the time period and our situation? And so we looked to the original Logan family settee in the Metropolitan Museum of Art that had come down in the one of James Logan's daughter's lines. And the file there maintained that there had been a little bit of textile located under a rose head nail. And it was a heavy brownish gold fabric, a good quality wool, reddish gold in hue. And unfortunately, the original fibers were nowhere to be found at the mat. And it's our hope that they're actually still under this textile that was applied in the late 70s. And if they go to reupholster it at some point, that that can actually be investigated more deeply through dye analysis. But this is the Brunswick damask that is a kind of ready-made one that is on that if you go to see it at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. But keep that in your mind, a brownish gold and something that's reddish gold in hue. So we decided to dye analyze our Logan family quilt. Its design is of a fairly kind of suggestive of an early date. Some scholars have even suggested it could date as early as 1714 when the Logans were married. It may date more to the time of actually furnishing of Stenton. But Richard Newman, who is a conservator at the MFA in Boston, this was actually quite a long process and not an easy one. And I think he was never really happy that he felt like he was absolutely sure of the color, but he ultimately wrote to me, "I detected a compound called morin, and this is commonly found in old FUSTIC. And old FUSTIC is very likely the dye." He didn't want to come right out and tell me for sure it was, but we had to run with this this color. And just interestingly, how as we did the paint as well, these things would kind of compound. But old fustic comes from the heartwood of Dyer's mulberry, and that's a tropical South American tree. So here again is that sense of this color, its origin being South American, but it creates color fast and light fast dark yellows to a warm peach color, and it's at low cost. It was used extensively from about 1600 to 1850 and produced the khaki color for US military uniforms during World War I. I went to winter tour to the Downs Collection Library, where there are these Norwich, England Dyer's swatch books from the 1780s. And so there are no formulas to go with them. Those would have been kind of the trade secrets of the dyers, but these books survive in amazing condition, where you can see samples of these strips of dyed cloth that were meant to be used for samples for someone to choose colors, and they're for the most part, you know, unadulterated by light. So this was just also an amazing resource to have some period swatches to kind of look at and compare. And so we were looking at the warm kind of honey color of the maple furniture in the room. We began investigating the original paint and took one shutter all the way down to its original layer. As I mentioned, we had this old fustic. And so there's this kind of sense that color and the texture of the damask and the quilting of the quilt, the quilt itself, and the maple texture, all these things were going to play a part in the aesthetic of this room. And there's the Logan high chest, and you can see the stripy sense of the tiger maple, that texture that it has brought to the room. This is the old paint, and getting ready to start our new paint. And this is really a first for Stenton. We made this decision. We did all this paint analysis and worked with a conservator who had a formula for us, that we would work with a conservator, another conservator who actually makes paint, and he and an artist applied the paint. So we did not choose a ready-made color for the room, and this is handmade paint with the pigments identified. Just a little bit about I mentioned the maple chairs in the room are very expensive, seemingly out of line with it just being costly because the damask was costly. And I have not been able to, I haven't found another, and I have not been able to really get after the provenance that goes with these this single maple chair, I should say, that's in the maple bedroom at Winterthur. But I do wonder if it's possible that this was the Logan, the suite of maple chairs, which would have been seen as very fashionable in the 1730s, with the carved shell and these little carved volutes and a claw and ball foot that would have been. So it's really very much that Queen Anne compass seat form that you think of, but actually also having a claw and ball foot would have made these particularly fashionable at the time. So there's Catherine Myers, our finishes analyst at work in the room. She would come in and take samples and be sure she had the information she needed before she went away and really prepared the samples. But she was addressing specific questions for us that we had about the space, including what was the original color. So this layer that she found is an ochre-based paint with flecks of red iron oxide or red ochre. So this is an iron-based pigment bound with linseed oil and bulked and tinted with white lead, which is not surprising. And of course, we didn't use lead in the recreated paint. We used a titanium white. But I'm just highlighting again the 1985 paint scheme I mentioned earlier with these dark complements. And what Cassie found was quite different, in that she was able to establish that all the wood elements of the room were yellow. So like the background in this kind of conversation piece painting here, the baseboards, and the chair rails and the window seats and the sills, everything was this ochre-based yellow. So that was going to dramatically change the sense of the room when we would get to that. And we were also asking her specific questions in some cases about certain areas. And actually, I'll go back here. We did a little bit of an exhibit along the way in the room about our research and the work. And we have an arrow pointing this particular corner or edge of the window seat on either side. So this one only on the left and this one only on the right are cut flush instead of the rounded trim. They were cut. And I wondered if through paint analysis, we might find out if that happened in this kind of first generation or not. And in fact, one of the things that Catherine established for us is that even the cut window seat edges did show that original ochre paint as the first layer in the sequence, suggesting they were cut early and before the yellow paint was ever applied. And so I wondered if this had to do, you kind of get a sense in this image with the high chest here, with showing off the back leg of the high chest. And that will also come into play a little bit when we talk about the curtain length. But the high chest would have just fit with the sort of lips of those window seats, but by cutting them, it just allows the viewer to really fully see the leg more completely. These are just some of the samples. Catherine purchased a lot of different red and yellow ochres and from different parts of the world to play around with the pigments and really try to match what she'd uncovered here on the rear side of the one shutter that we took all the way down to its first layer. And with that exception, all the other paint in the room was left intact underneath. We did some sanding. There were some repairs to the room, both plaster and wood. But we shellacked all the wood. So there's this barrier between the 1980s paint and then this new paint on top. And you can see us testing out some of these samples in the space. This is the priming coat as it went on. And once we had the mixed paint, this incredible shine and glow that it had for quite some time, because it really did take quite a long time to dry. Without lead, I learned, I didn't really know this before, that lead is one of the things that is a drying agent and makes old paint so hard. It was part of its excellence in terms of formulation. But you can see here that the yellow, this golden ochre really gives a pop to the blue tiles, the bright cobalt blue tin glazed tiles that are original to the room also really stand out against this yellow paint. And so this is as it was fresh in 2017, and it really didn't dry to the touch until 2019. And in fact, it still in the summer gets a little bit soft. So not having lead is you almost really, we're being a museum, we can live with this finish, but I know that the conservator is interested in doing more with chalk in the formulations, which our Catherine, our investigator, didn't want to do too much because she felt it would change the color, but that you couldn't live with this kind of paint in your home. It would just be too tacky for too long. Now I'm going to turn to the textile trim on the curtains and the beds and the settee. And this quote was pulled out by, this is also if you're really interested in historic textiles, I can refer you to Florence Montgomery, Textiles in America, is a classic work with a really wonderful glossary in the back. And she pulled out this quote, but the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting of Women Friends in 1698 warned that no superfluous furniture be in your houses, as great fringes about your valances and double curtains, and many such like needless things, which the truth maketh manifest to the humble-minded. So I felt like this quote could inform our thinking about trims a bit, because this is pre-1700, and specifically the women friends, so suggesting that women really are playing quite a role in the upholstering of their interiors, um, are warning about superfluous trims. And if they're warning about it, it means they're doing it. And so despite that idea that we kind of continue to carry around, I think, about what the meaning of Quaker plainness is, it's a concept that very much evolves over time. And I think this quote in effect gives us permission to do our trim, which, as you'll see in its own way, was not, we could have certainly grown our budget for trimming if we had wanted to pursue something even more. But I tried to follow what I was seeing for the kind of mercantile class, upper middle class English bedsteads as well, like the examples we were seeing in the doll houses, where you have the textile, and then the trim is really outlining all the seams and doing that kind of covering and finishing for you, rather than added extra decoration. So we worked with Thistle Hill Weavers in Cherry Hill, New York, and these kinds of diamond designs were really quite common. The trim is just exactly an inch wide. Sometimes in modern parlance, we call them a tape. In the 18th century, they actually called it lace. And we looked at various, thread colors as well. So not this kind of more orangey one in the sample, but we went with this cinnabar red. And red and yellow seem to be quite common combinations in the 18th century. Yellow beds with red trim or yellow trim, red beds with gold or yellow trim. So we were seeing a lot of that, and it felt right in the room. We also did a sample tape with some blue in it, and it just didn't sit well. But the truth is, I had no direct evidence from the Logan's ledgers or descriptions that I could go on to say, oh, this definitely was red. This was something that we kind of felt out. And I wish I had documentary evidence to say, here's my, I'm ordering the diamond red tape today, but we didn't have that. But I also looked to this Peabody Essex Museum surviving valance. And this has got trim upon trim, but you can see this is kind of two widths of this diamond sort of trim here on this yellow watered wool. Also has a stripe in it. So that was a really elaborate textile that survived in New England. And interestingly, more of these bed hanging textiles and these valances and so forth do survive in New England collections. And so I looked to, this is the John Brown family valance at the Rhode Island Historical Society, and you can see the valance itself is in a wool and outlined in this tape with a kind of ionic sort of swirl at the corner. A little more elaborate. This one has some silver thread that's in the Historic New England collection. It looks very blue now, but would originally have been a green. And then this is the back side of that Peabody Essex Museum valance. You can just see here how it's sewn. It's filled with a buckram inside to stiffen it, and you're seeing the sort of more plain and coarse fabric of the backside. And so we would copy all those kinds of elements in our work. But we were trying to figure out how to design. We created the patterns. Beth Paolini and I worked on this together in the room. And so we wanted our balances to be in conversation visually with the cornice that we had copied, and where it curved and where it dipped in. And we looked also to the shapes of the furniture in the room, the Logan high chest and dressing table, and the little pendant drop that we looked to for inspiration for the interior back design, the shape of the Logan settee with its curves and kind of almost wings like a wing chair, and then these surviving examples. And so this was very much something that was not an exact copy of a historic balance, but one that worked with our historic cornice and our bed design overall. And this is in Elizabeth Palini's studio, her working on creating these and applying the trims. We did have physical evidence for our bed curtain rings and window curtain rings from our the archaeology that was done at Stenton in the 1980s. These are the rings from the feature, and there were sort of two sizes. This larger size that we copied for the bed curtains, which have to move across a longer run of rod, and the smaller ones that we used for the interior, or sorry, for the window curtains. And again, we didn't have good evidence in terms of like whether there were the inventory did not mention window balances, and I didn't know if there might be window cornices. But we went ahead and worked with on the premise that there could have been simple iron rods. So even an elegant room like this at Wanstead in 1730, captured in this painting at the Philadelphia Museum, has curtains that just draw across iron rods. And you can see here a detail from this much older painting. And here is our local blacksmith, Luke de Berardinis, having made the compass rod for the bedstead in two sections. So working it into place. And then together we designed these simple rods to fit up onto the cornice of the room for the window curtains. And I mentioned, this question of what should the height of the window curtains be? And ultimately, we decided that stopping them at the window seat rather than taking them to the floor made a lot of sense. One, for the reason of these cuts. And here's actually, you can see that squared off and just maybe see the shadow of the original shape of the window seat there, and then how it's cut. And it just allows for this view of the shaping of the rear leg of the high chest. But the window measurement itself became evidence too, in that just from the point on the cornice where we wanted to place the rod to the top of the window seats was exactly 100 inches. And the window width, the opening, was 50 inches wide. And this just made a really kind of straightforward proportion for our thinking about how big to make these curtains. And you get a sense for the way the damask looks when the light comes through. Here's another bit of sample. We played around with more than 11 different dye samples till we ultimately arrived at the color, the old FUSTIC color that we would put on the full run of textile. This is shellac before it's heated. So we shellacked, as I mentioned, we shellacked the room itself prior to painting, and we shellacked all the wood elements of the bedstead prior to upholstering. And this is a way of, excuse me, sealing it to take the textile. And this was also done historically. And there's, again, in Beth's home, she's working with these large panels and using warm hide glue. So using traditional techniques to upholster the textile to the wood. And there's these are the panels for the back. So she laid the design out very carefully so that we would have symmetry in all the kind of important places. And then this is the trim that Thistle Hill Weavers had made. So some of it we received in 1-inch runs where we needed to have on the edges of the wood and so forth. We had these perfect 1-inch pieces. But to save ourselves some funds, Rabbit Goody was making them in 5 to 5-inch widths, so we could cut them apart for when we needed to trim the edges of the curtains and so forth. And these rougher edges could be tucked underneath. So we had a kind of combination of trims to work with. And here you can see Beth again applying, taking this 1-inch piece and just covering the 1-inch wide edge of wood where textile and trim are going to meet. And all the seams were covered. And I still find it kind of amazing when I stop to kind of contemplate what it looks like when you take something that's as sculptural as wood and apply textile directly to it, that it takes this, that cloth can take a wooden form. It just creates a really interesting dynamic. And this is our Tallman bed crew, bed assembly crew. And if we have time, we have a little video we can show you at the end, a kind of quick mock-up of everything getting put together in place. So this is Ken Robinson, who's our facilities manager for headquarters on Latimer Street and at Stenton. This is my brother, who's much taller than I am, and Kevin Lynch, who was our museum assistant at the time, and Mike Podmaninsky and Dennis here. So we had quite a day of raising the bed, using ropes to pull it up. There's sliding in the ceiling. Mike sort of peeking over the top as he was getting things tied in place. And there's Beth beginning the process of covering these wooden seams that she couldn't do until that was all put in place. And you can see here too that the bedstead cornice really sits right in line with the cornice in the room, and that the rope also adjusted itself a little bit over time. And there's, as I mentioned, the wider tape being tucked under to finish the edges of the curtain. And we weren't really sure how far apart we needed to place our rings onto the curtains, and so again looked to Winiture for examples. And so some of them, like this yellow silk and wool, for example, was 3 inches apart, and another one was, I think, my yeah, I can't see my own text with what's on. I think it was 6 inches apart, and we went to sort of split the difference so that ours are 4 inches apart. And you can see, again, we kind of copied from historic examples to lay out this 1/2 inch just plain tape that would support the rings ultimately. You can see Beth pinning that up. And these are what are known as flat felled seams. It's the same kind of seam that runs down the side of blue jeans, which she used, that's commonly used historically, and she used that to put the seams of the curtains together. And you can see how that looks when the light kind of comes through. And these are the widths of the damask. Beth also created a sacking bottom. So in this case, it's strips of this heavy linen are nailed. We bought some reproduction style rosehead nails, are nailed into this little rabbit kind of edge in the bed frame. And then this piece is simply just woven in, and then that's pulled very tight to support the mattresses. Here we are working out the pattern for the feet. And it was also important to me that we were sure we weren't going to have spaces that would open up. Sometimes when you look at historic balances and so forth, that have reproductions that have been made, these pieces are not stitched together, and maybe sometimes don't even come all the way together. And so we made a point to be sure that ours were, and Beth sewed them. We were able to use an older cotton-filled 20th century mattress as our base mattress, and then we put a polyester-filled sort of fluffy tick on top to represent the feather mattress that would have been there. There's Beth working inside the bedstead, nailing all of these curtains to the bedstead. All the valances are nailed in place. And actually, you can see what I mean here on the reproduction Handel House bed in London, how you can see the leg, and I wanted to be sure we avoided that. But one thing I went back and had not remembered, I was able to go back just before we were finishing things. I was in London teaching a class, and there are these just simple curved moldings that sit on the outside edges of the the bedstead frame. Unfortunately, Mike was able to build us some, and we had enough fabric to cover them that we too could finish our bedstead in this sort of more polished way along the edges there. And there's Beth just finishing up along what we sort of were calling the feet. And we placed the historic quilt on the bed for now. We are working on a reproduction, kind of contemporary whole cloth quilt for this bedstead as well, because we cannot. We've actually, in some respects, it's been a particularly good year to at Stenton for the quilt to not have so much visitation, but we can't keep it on view indefinitely. We also commissioned professional photography, so it's when it's really boldly lit, for as it was for that occasion, it really glows with a very intense yellow, whereas much of the time it has this, what you might think of as like a sort of more khaki color, as described by some of the old FUSTIC descriptions. And this painting here is not actually at Stenton yet, but we're anticipating arrival of by bequest of a Logan descendant. This is James Logan's daughter, Sarah, and are thinking that we will probably hang her on the pier here in the room, and perhaps more actively speak about interpreting this room and as a space that women particularly socialized in. So this leads me to this idea that the maple bedroom, sometimes collectors in the 20th century also would assemble sort of maple bedrooms. Henry Francis DuPont had one. There was one at Mount Cuba, which is the Mrs. Copeland's property, where the James Logan high-chested dressing table had been in her maple bedroom. And so this idea that the maple bedroom maybe isn't just a 20th century phenomenon, but was actually an 18th century one too. I just want to take some time to thank our funders. I don't know if Ann Genter was able to join us today on this Zoom or not, but she has been on a trustee for the Richard C. Von Hess Foundation, which has supported a number of research projects at Stenton, and was very generous in helping us with this project too. And we're so grateful to Ann for her help and support. The Kobe Foundation in New York, and our own Leonore Smart Wetherill Fund for Decorative Arts Scholarship at Stenton. This is, some of you might know Nora Wetherill, who's been deceased a little over 10 years now, and her children created this fund, which has also enabled a lot of our research and more decorative arts and conferences, these projects that we've done. We have the Stenton Restoration Fund, which we specifically dipped into for the paint. And our Project Angel, Hannah Lowell Henderson, pictured here, who came to a meeting about the project. I'm not sure whether she planned it or not, but she was dressed in an old FUSTIC jacket that day, and we captured her here as we were considering all the final trimmings, and ultimately that the trim we did commission cost us a little more than we had initially budgeted. And so Hannah really saved the day and made the project fly, made our flying tester bed fly. And I won't go into all these names. I mentioned some of them in the course of the presentation, but there were just so many people with specific expertise. Every aspect of this project required more research, and someone with amazing craft skills who helped to make it a reality for us, and advisors who helped in the research. It just couldn't be done without many minds and much expertise. And I sort of joke here, but it takes a village to raise Bedstead. So I'm still grateful to the Pennsylvania Dames for supporting us as staff in taking on this project, which was a big one for Stenton, and really I think has empowered us to think more about some of the